In December of 2015, the town of Waxhaw and the YMCA of Greater Charlotte entered into what we now know as a joint use and scheduling agreement to develop two properties, two separate properties, by the way, in the Cureton area on Providence Road in Waxhaw. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic and current economic conditions, the town and the YMCA mutually and amicably agreed to release each other from the obligations set forth in the original document, thus terminating the agreement. The town of Waxhaw and the YMCA of Greater Charlotte remain committed to providing community programs that build healthy minds, bodies, and spirit. The YMCA of Greater Charlotte will continue to serve the town of Waxhaw and Union County through their day camp programs, homeschool programming, and a 21st Century Learning Grant in partnership with Union County Public Schools. Now, with all that said, let me try to inform people on kind of how this deal happened, how it went down, and what's real and what's not. The original agreement set forth that the town, in conjunction with the YMCA's purchase of their property along the roadway there on Providence Road at Cureton Shopping Center, they had purchased their property, and the town's responsibility was to purchase the property behind there, and both of them independently were going to be developed by these separate entities. The YMCA was going to develop and build their property, and the town was going to develop and build their respective property. And so that joint use agreement originally called for a large facility. Is actually the anticipation was, by the document, the anticipation was to allow up to 100,000 square feet. But initially, the YMCA was going to construct their premises starting out with at least 10,000 square feet. They didn't have a pool in this one, and a parking lot reasonably accessible by pedestrians to the town park via the joint access. The phasing of construction would be based on the YMCA's ability to fund, but the initial improvements must have been completed within a 4-year and 6-month time frame from obtaining necessary state, federal, and governmental approvals to construct in the floodplain, the floodway, or flood zone areas. And I understand that they did get that during this time frame. The YMCA was then required to substantially complete and include facilities of at least 50,000 square feet within 10 years and 6 months from the effective date, the original date of the agreement in 2015. Along the way, the YMCA was also to give us reporting on their financial success on progress. The first one was sometime in 2017, essentially almost 2 years after the original agreement. At 2017, they were to report a confirmation of receiving 35% of the funds necessary to start the YMCA. And in conjunction with that, a year later in 2018, the YMCA was to provide the town with a standard of completion that secured 65% of the funds necessary. We all know that certainly there are financial constraints to every project that comes, both ours and the YMCA. But in the middle of those two reporting periods, the town received a letter from Todd Tibbetts, who is the president of the YMCA. This was on November 1st of 2017. And in that letter, it essentially describes some of the conditions that were that the YMCA was up against, and they were going to have some difficulties in there. In fact, at the very end of it, as it stated, as you know, the YMCA, the goal is to execute a fiscally responsible strategy which will enable our YMCA to serve the citizens of Waxhaw for many years to come. However, we do want to alert the town that due to unforeseen circumstances out of the YMCA's control, the YMCA may not be able to meet its obligations as specified in the agreement as it currently exists, and the town should plan accordingly. And that was in November 1st of 2017. About a year and a half later, the town responded to that letter, and the letter resulted in what we now know as the First Amendment to the Joint Use and Scheduling Agreement. And in that First Amendment, there were several conditions. One of the major ones was that the YMCA was relieved of its responsibility to provide financials to the town. And again, these are documents that were negotiated by prior town manager and prior board. What happened as well on that is that there was not going to be a guarantee of the building size. It was going to be on an as needed, as grow basis. So the initial building would only be 10,000 square feet, scaled down from the original anticipated 100,000 square feet, scaled down again to 50,000 square feet, and now scaled down to 10. And again, no pool in that. So it became apparent that the YMCA was probably struggling a little bit with their fundraising efforts. And so we had some reporting milestones on our side of the agreement that we needed to have a discussion with the Y. So in January of this year, I called a meeting with the YMCA, and I had Mayor Pro Tem McMillan sit in with me, and I had Commissioner Pedro Mori sit in with me, along with the now town manager, Jeff Wells, and the town clerk, Melody Schuler. And with that, we had two representatives from the YMCA, Steve Bowers and Ben Pinniger. And we discussed a few things about the milestones, because we certainly had some concerns whether or not both parties could actually execute. Because what this joint use agreement was providing for is not only did the YMCA had to build their facility, but that joint use and scheduling agreement required the town to spend nearly $10 million to complete their end of the negotiations, to complete their end of the agreement. And that was going to become very difficult. And as we've now learned as we move forward, that the town's borrowing capacity was now in the neighborhood of $3.5 million. And we were concerned about that going in, on whether or not certainly we could meet our end of the obligations, and certainly wanted to ask the YMCA, since they were relieved of their reporting responsibilities, we wanted to check in with them to make sure that they were able to perform. What had transpired after that is a few other comments and dialogues and some meetings between the now town manager and the Y, and then a couple of meetings that I had with Mr. Bowers and myself, and we came to the conclusion that, you know, as far as the town's responsibility on this matter, we would really struggle to be able to do this with any available cash that we might have and our borrowing capacity. And if, in fact, that the Y was not going to be able to go forward with their end of the agreement, we needed to know that now, so we wouldn't take everything we had and put it into a couple of 3 soccer fields and a parking lot and then have no Y. Hard dialogue to have. And I think that we've all helped each other come to the conclusions that it was probably not in the best interest at this time on this project at this location for the Y and the town to continue literally kicking the can down the road and hoping and praying that something might happen. Because if you look at the costs of the building for the Y anyway, the Y had shared with us that their estimated construction costs for the building were about $400 a foot. So anyone can do the math on it. If you start with the bigger building at 100,000 square feet, that's $40 million. They were $40 million short of that goal. If you looked at the 20,000 foot building, you get another number. And certainly when you go down to the 10,000 foot building at $400 a foot, you've got a $4 million spend minimally. And again, I think they realized that certainly with the pandemic hitting us and their ability to perform, if they haven't performed in 6 years, that the likelihood of them going forward might be pretty slim. And so we had asked them if they were able to raise funds for the building, and the answer was no, they had not. And it was actually a very, very good discussion with the Y to have us partner with them in the discussion. Some very difficult dialogue that went on, but at the end of the day, we both realized that the best thing for both parties to do was to terminate the joint use and scheduling agreement. So we met with the Y again. We had some comments and a draft. We had their attorneys draft the termination agreement. That termination agreement was first signed by the YMCA after approval on their board. That was on on July 8th. And then we subsequently then put it on our consent agenda, because that's actually how the project came to the town in the first place. We put it on our consent agenda and agreed to do this. Now, we're not in the business of kicking our partners when they're down. It's a difficult time out there for everybody involved. And my agreement with the YMCA was to make sure that if we did anything with respect to an announcement about this, that we would do it with the joint statement that actually I read at the beginning of this commentary. So we want to, take into consideration a lot of the emotions that some of the townspeople might have had, certain perceptions on what the deal was. And certainly, these documents are public documents, are available if anybody would want to access them, and they're available. But the short story is that it was still in the best interest for us not to perform. Doesn't mean that this kind of agreement might not come together another time, another place, but this one, like some projects, just weren't going to happen. The interesting part along the way during our conversations with the Y is I received a phone call from a certain individual, Mr. Tommy Hall. Mr. Tommy Hall, which his family was the namesake of this development, and he asked me, he said, "Hey, Mayor, what's going on with the Y?" And so he and I had some conversations about everything that I've just exposed to you here, and I think he was just unfortunately disappointed. He had given money to the Y, a $2 million donation to the Y in 2008 and 2009. My guess is that he probably split that on tax years, but again, that's up to him. But it was a $2 million donation in 2008 and 2009, and here we were today with, unfortunately, the inability to move forward. So again, I hope that everybody understands that this was not something that was clandestine. We are being very respectful and mindful of our then partners at YMCA. We look forward actually to doing another project with them sometime soon. But I think that going forward, I think they all understand that they were not be able to do the deal, and there was no reason just to go forward either.